Good morning. So sorry about, I think Mr. Ganung's email said that I was speaking today. Actually, I was just organizing the speaker, so you won't hear from me today, perhaps maybe sometime in January or sometime in the winter. But today I'm welcoming Ray Hillen of Agio Security, or Agio Security, who's coming to talk to us today. Ray Hillen is a certified information security systems professional and Agio's lead payment card industry qualified security assessor. He has over 14 years of experience in the cybersecurity industry, focusing on providing firms a realistic and comprehensive security strategy. Ray has a diverse technical background with a blended foundation in military and corporate cybersecurity. His experience encompasses a vast spectrum of organizations from state and federal government to local municipalities, from Fortune 500 companies to small and medium business space, and from banks and credit unions to alternate investments managers. Additionally, Ray is Health Information Trust Alliance certified and has led the effort on security risk analysis projects for large area hospitals and other covered entities. As the director of Agio's security practice, Ray frequently shares his experience and knowledge through white papers, speaking engagements, cybersecurity seminars, and business development engagements. Please join me in welcoming Ray Hillen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Give me a second here to log into my system. Remember the password. Okay, so our theme this year for my organization as we evangelize cyber hygiene and try to cultivate good cyber security habits amongst users everywhere is take risks in life, but not with your cybersecurity. You know, life is about taking risk. In business, many of the most successful individuals take risk. Sometimes it's a measured risk, but we believe that when it comes to cybersecurity, you should have some things in place to provide you or to reduce your overall risk and exposure. So what we're going to talk about today briefly is why this even matters. And I think many of you are familiar with this topic. The threat landscape, what it looks like out there. We'll talk about social engineering a little bit, provide some examples in one of its activities, which we call phishing. There's some other things such as flash drive baiting and pretexting. We can certainly talk about that. Describe how we're all a target, almost on a daily basis. How we're also the front line, though, in our own personal computing lives, but as well as in an institution or an enterprise organization. Talk a little bit about mobile devices because they're so prevalent and we all have them, and in some cases we have many of them. And then arm you with a few tips and techniques to cultivate good cyber hygiene in your personal computing lives. So, why are we here? What's the problem? Almost quarterly, sometimes monthly, there's a large event. Typically in the public sector or private sector, there's a breach or unauthorized access of data or unauthorized disclosure of large amounts of data. You hear about the credit cards, the social security numbers, the personally identifiable information, the sensitive documents from the federal government or corporate organizations that have intellectual property. And many of you may be familiar with the Heartbleed hack or perhaps the iCloud hack of August of 2014. Does anybody recall that one? There were some celebrity photos that were disclosed. Okay, right. So that was actually a mischaracterization. iCloud wasn't hacked. iCloud's defenses did exactly what they were supposed to do. They only allowed someone to access the data with a username and password. It was the individuals and the system that was socially engineered and allowed the bad actors to gain access to, or unauthorized access to, these sensitive images that were then made public. What interests me is if I were to change out that middle snippet with a question mark, what's next? What's coming? You know, it's hard to anticipate it. What we do know, though, just by looking back over the last 2 or 3 years, is that something's going to happen every 2 to 3 months. It's going to impact millions of individuals, whether it's users or citizens or customers of some large organization, and it's going to create a lot of activity. So what is the current threat landscape? It's really, it's social engineering. It's much easier to attack a human than it is a firewall or an antivirus endpoint protection system. We are, us, the people, we are the problem. We're also part of the solution, though. What we're seeing there is social engineering campaigns that are very, very sophisticated. We're not talking about somebody sitting in a hut in some obscure third world country sending you an email asking you to help the Nigerian prince. I think we all get that. That's a fake, right? But the bad actors are getting very, very clever. They're using individuals with degrees in literature and English, and they're crafting very believable narratives and graphics, and we're being lured into going to websites that look like the real website but are imposters and are really a pass-through. And when we do these things, when we click on that link in many cases, or we open an attachment, malware can be inserted into our systems. Now, most of us run or should be running antivirus protection or anti-malware, and it's necessary, but it's not the panacea. It's not going to catch 100% of every piece of malicious code that's out there. And ultimately, it's the users that are being tricked into opening the door, whether it's in an institution like this or in your own personal computing lives. Instead of doing a frontal assault or a frontal attack on your system, they're getting you to open the door and let them in. And they establish a back channel in some cases and just monitor your activities through keyloggers and other sorts of malicious code. And it's getting worse. There's a number of organizations out there that will provide you reports and statistics, and they vary slightly from organization to organization. Verizon, Pwnman, Krebs is a good place to go if you want to learn about cybersecurity. But at the end of the day, the real message is that the amount of successful attacks is increasing. The amount of time to identify those attacks is increasing, and the amount of time to contain and eradicate or remove the malicious code is taking longer. From beginning of an assault or an attack to compromise is typically measured in minutes, if not seconds. From point of compromise to you or the organization understanding that it's happened is usually measured in days and weeks. And oh, by the way, it's usually a third party that lets you know that you have a problem. The organization or the individual doesn't typically understand themselves that they've been the victim of an attack, of a successful attack. And then the time to remediate, to contain and remove the malicious code is typically measured in weeks, if not months. Have any of you ever received some obscure email from somebody and you notice that in the to line there's all these people and you know some of them but you don't know all of them, and it's some really odd request, and usually this is an indicator that that individual, someone you know, their system has been perhaps compromised, and someone's walked their address book and is emailing out some content to everyone that's in their contacts, and in hopes that since you recognize the sender, that perhaps you'll take whatever action you're being asked to take. These are just numbers that support what I was just covering. So what's our risk? Well, there's financial risk for organizations, and you personally, from a bank account standpoint, or as you grow and mature and start establishing assets. There can be operational risk, whether it's operations for an organization or just you trying to go through your basic daily routine in your life. And there can be reputational risk, as can be seen by large organizations that have had breaches. The public is less likely to trust them with their money, their sensitive data. Or on a personal level, reputational risk, if you go back to August of 2014 for those celebrity photos that were put out there. That can be a hard thing to overcome when your personal and private information is made public. Unfortunately, this is becoming the new normal. The former director for the FBI stated that he believes there's two types of organizations, those that have been hacked and those that will be. We actually maintain that all of us have had an event, an unauthorized access of some sort, and I'm not suggesting a breach on the scale of Target or what some of the federal government organizations have experienced, but rather we've all experienced some unauthorized access to one of our computing systems. Have any of you ever experienced what we call a fake antivirus notification? Something installs itself and wants you to pay $19.95 or go here and update something because it says you have a virus. It's somewhat innocuous, but that's an example of something out there inserting itself into your system without your authorization. In short, you've been had. So what's the risk here? Well, there's school-specific data that is your personally identifiable information, which it needs to be kept, it needs to be controlled. There's employee data, which is similar. And then, of course, there are payment transactions going on here occasionally, and the payment card, the payment data of the card holder needs to remain confidential and protected as well. So we look back to 2014, some of the largest breaches involve something called phishing, and I talked about this in the beginning as part of the agenda. It's one of the activities in the social engineering construct. It's very effective. It's very effective. It's easy to get a user to click a link or put in a credential, as evidenced by Sony, eBay, Target, Home Depot. These breaches impacted millions of individuals. I would imagine somebody sitting here today, many of you, may have been impacted by this if you happen to use any of the services or products of these organizations. And you or your families may have received some kind of notification that your numbers were breached. You need to be, you need to be looking for odd activity, or we may provide credit monitoring. But let me suggest to you something else. When something like this happens on a large scale and it impacts you or your friends or your family, this is exactly the time where you're the most susceptible to being attacked from an imposter organization who says they're Sony, who says they're Target, and they get a copy of that notification that's being sent out by Target or Sony, and they send it to you, but when you click on their link, you're going to a website that's a pass-through, perhaps, or an imposter website, and it's trying to harvest data from the host that you're using to go to that website. So just be aware of that. So how are we all a target? Well, we demonstrated this here back in September. We conducted a phishing campaign. I'm sure many of you recall. We sent out a campaign, and the addresses were supplied to us to shorten the time it took to develop the target list. You would have received an email that looks like this. You did receive an email that looks like this. It was a friend request to Facebook. It asked you to click a link, go to the Facebook logon page to view the new request. Does anyone remember this? Okay. This is a very basic technique. This is a very simple example, not very sophisticated. If you were using your phones, then you probably didn't fall for this because it wouldn't have worked on your phone if you used the app, right? But if you were on a laptop and if you log into Facebook via a web browser, then you may or may not have become a victim. When you click the link, you would have went to what looks like the actual Facebook page, for those of you that did click the link. You would have put in your username and password, perhaps, and then when you hit submit or enter, it would have looked like you may have miskeyed your password, and you were sitting there with the same username and password logon prompt again, right? The same screen. So what the typical user does is they go, oh, I must have fat-fingered my password. They put it back in, and they log in. And had you done that in this case, then you would have been in the actual Facebook website and your actual profile. That friend request wasn't there. You probably would have been distracted by something else you were doing or an email that came in. I think we all know what I'm talking about. And you would have went on with your day. What you didn't realize was when you click the link the first time and you put in your credentials, you're putting it into our fake website. And as soon as you hit enter, we redirected you to the actual Facebook website so that when you actually logged in, you wouldn't have noticed anything suspicious other than the fact that this friend request wasn't there. Very common technique, very easy. Most individuals don't get it. They don't realize they've just been had and their credentials have just been skimmed off the top. Now the bad actors have a starting point. The results here, 809 emails were sent, 52 opened. I wouldn't worry about the open and the downloading of images. That's just an indicator of how many individuals actually viewed the email or opened it. 15% of the recipients clicked the link and 5% put their credentials in. Just to be clear, we didn't save the credentials. We just used it as a data point, the fact that you actually took action. This is about average in the industry, and it's about average for all of these that we conduct for all organizations that we work for. About 12% actually click the links, but 5% credentials posting is common. So, moving on. How you're the front line. A couple indicators. Verify your name, or if you don't respond, trying to foster a sense of urgency, or dear valued customer. These can be indicators of a phishing attempt. However, unfortunately, valid organizations or reputable organizations sending valid communications use some of the same openings. So it should just raise a flag. Your spidey sense should start tingling when you see some of these things. It's not always an indicator of a fake email, but it should make you take a step back and think for a moment before you click the link. I'm going to give you an example that this one came to me last summer, and it almost got me. I received this email. I was on the phone. I was busy. I was engaged. Email pops in, and the bad actors know what's going on. They know how email works. They know that when you're working on something, it's just kind of a small little box pops up, shows you the subject line and the sender, and then goes away. It grabs your attention. So they crafted the subject line that said mail termination alert from the Gmail team. Well, that got my sense. That got my attention going. They got my attention. It raised my adrenaline. If you look at the middle red area, this is the hook. This is what got me, almost, right? If I did not send this request, which I didn't, of course, I could stop that termination process by clicking the link below. Well, of course I don't want my Gmail terminated. This was on my corporate account. I didn't send the request, so I'm drawn right to clicking that link. It's natural. You just want to click it. However, by hovering over the link, the actual address, the Uniform Resource Locator, or URL, was revealed to me, and even though it had Gmail in the name, the way it's crafted was to a fake organization that wasn't actually Gmail. What's interesting is this was what we call an hour zero attack. Our countermeasures for this type of thing would have allowed me to go to it had I clicked the link. We use something called Click Protect. Because it was unverified and uncategorized, our own countermeasures said that this appeared to be safe. I would have been had. And this is what the website looked like, just like the real one, the real deal. Had I gone to that website, the first thing that would happen, it would have started essentially via technology, via connections, it would have started assessing my web browser and my plugins to see if there were any vulnerabilities there. Had I been foolish enough to put my username and password in, it may have passed me through to the Gmail website. It may have redirected me like we did with the test here, and it just grabbed my username and password. Either way, they would have had a starting point for my accounts. Fortunately, I caught this, and I use this as an example that this can happen to anybody, and it does. It happens quite often. Here's another example, and this is just to show you that there's value in hovering over the link when you can. It's very difficult to do on a phone or a tablet, or iPad. But when you're on a computer, if you hover over the link, very often the actual URL, or the web address, if you will be revealed to you. And just because it has the name Gmail in it doesn't necessarily mean it's valid. If you don't understand how those are crafted, then perhaps you could ask somebody. But you should just be aware, and this is one technique you can use. Has anyone ever seen the cat playing piano on YouTube? Okay, we've all seen this. My own daughters forwarded this to, hey, Dad, check this out. Look at this cat. Well, since this is familiar to me, I look at the URL, and it's not youtube.com, it's u.tube.com.ru. Had I gone to that website, it would have played the cat video, but it was actually an imposter web server sitting in Russia somewhere. And who knows what type of malicious code was sitting on that system waiting to attack all hosts that arrived to it. So why does any of this even matter? Who cares if they get my Gmail password, or my YouTube password, or my LinkedIn password, or my Facebook password? Why does it even matter? Well, think about this. How many of you, your friends or your family, create a strong, complex password? I mean, I think we all get that, right? ABC123 is not a complex password, even though it has letters and numbers, right? We create something that we think is strong to keep out prying eyes, and then we use it for every single account we have because it's easy to remember. Think about it. We use it for Facebook, we use it for our email, we use it for, whatever, perhaps our financial, perhaps our banking, or other social media accounts. But think about this. When you sign up for some obscure website because you need access to a resource, perhaps you're doing research for a paper you're writing, and you're trying to download a white paper, and they want you to enroll, and they want to know your email address, and they make you create an account, even though you'll probably never go back to this website again. And you use jsmith@gmail.com, ABC123, because it's the one you use for everything else. It's easy to remember. Doesn't delay you. You don't want to be bothered with this whole security thing. When this obscure website, which you may never go to again, gets hacked because it's a low-budget organization that they don't have good cybersecurity, the bad actors will try to steal the user account database. This happened with the Sony PlayStation hack, by the way. They'll steal the user account database, and now they have a starting point. jsmith@gmail.com, ABC123, and they can plug that in, and a script kiddie can do this. There's a script. You can go into 500 different websites and services out there, and it'll plug in jsmith@gmail.com and ABC123, and it'll try to gain access to every popular website, banking website, healthcare website, social media website, iCloud, Google Drive, and so on and so on and so forth, once they have access to a username and password. So be careful about using the same username and password for every site or service that you have to sign up for, or you use or leverage. What do we recommend? We recommend a password manager. Most of us have probably in excess of 50, some of us 150 different sites or services that we use through the course of a day, week, month, year. It becomes very difficult to manage passwords when you're trying to keep a separate password for each website you use. By using a password manager, and some of them cost, they're free or they cost very little, they help you at least manage the password, and they can give you advance warning. If that obscure website gets hacked, it can let you know that, hey, this website out there that you have an account with was hacked, you need to change your password. And it can do it for you and make it complex, and you don't even have to remember it. Don't exchange content from two different systems. This is more for a corporate environment, but it's a good thing to follow. Don't click on the link or pop-up messages. Yes, I think we all get it. Putting your credentials into a fake website's bad. However, I would suggest to you that just clicking the link and going to a website that has malicious code baked into it can be almost as risky, particularly if you're using systems that you're not keeping up to date with the security patches. With the web browser, the web plugins, you can be very vulnerable, and you can be attacked and not even know it's happened. You should never email personal financial information. Email is no more protected than a postcard. Anytime you click send, you should expect that anything in between you and the recipient that can intercept it can read it. And of course, always be cautious about opening attachments, particularly if they're unsolicited. Let's talk about social media briefly. I'm going to give you a few tips on Facebook. So you should change your passwords frequently or semi-frequently within reason. You should go to your settings there and log out all accounts. You want to review your activity logs. If you go to settings and apps, you can remove all apps and devices that are not in use. You should understand what has access or what you've allowed access to your Facebook account or profile. You can go to security settings and select login approval, and you can require a security code to text your device each time you log in from a new device. I would encourage you to at least evaluate that possibility so that if somebody does steal your password or gets your password and they try to log into your Facebook account from a device that's never logged into your account before, you'll at least get a text on your mobile device, right? You have an opportunity to stop it. Review your browsers and apps to see who's logged in, where, and remove. You can go into these settings in Facebook and you can understand exactly who has access to what and what's currently active. And you should at least be aware of it. I'm not suggesting that you need to become a cybersecurity professional, but you should at least have an understanding of what has access to your data and how it can be leveraged, and restrict it as much as possible or practical in your personal life. So we're gonna kind of bring it to a close here and talk about mobile devices. So these are great. We're connected. We can do so much all the time from just about anywhere. However, we're very hungry for apps, and we just want things to work, and we just move right on. I think we all get that when we buy a brand new laptop, we need to update it and put antivirus on there, and we typically do that. First thing we do when we buy a phone is install apps. We just blow right by any of the security things. What I would suggest to you is that there are apps out there that ask for access to things that perhaps they don't need access to. There are flashlight apps out there, which really don't even need anymore with the modern phones. It's integrated. There are flashlight apps out there that want access to your contacts, your location, your text messages, your photos. I don't know for what purpose other than to monetize that information about you and your activities. So what I would suggest to you is if you have a minute, I'm going to take out my phone. I have an iPhone. I don't have an Android anymore. And if you have yours with you, you may want to just follow along. This won't take but a minute. If you go to your settings, are we allowed to do this? Are we allowed to take out our phones? Okay. I didn't say call anybody or text anybody. We're just going to look at it. Okay. So if you go to I have an iPhone. Android's very similar. If you go to privacy on your iPhone in settings, go to contacts. How many applications have access to your contacts? You can with the iPhone, you can turn this off. You have granular control of this. You should be aware of what type of access you're allowing these apps to have to your data. How many of you keep sensitive information in your contacts? How many of you keep a username or password in your contacts? How many, you see where I'm going with this? Do you have some obscure app, Angry Birds, that's being served up to you from somewhere else that may have access to this information about you? What I would suggest to you is that you turn all these off unless you're using them. Some applications need access to your location, like Uber. It's kind of how it works. They need to know where you are so they can come pick you up, right? But the application is smart enough that if you're trying to use Uber and your location services are turned off, it'll nudge you and say, turn it on. It takes an extra second. I'm not suggesting that you should turn everything off all the time. All I'm trying to do today is just raise your awareness. You should be aware of what access you've allowed to these apps and the makers of these apps and the controllers of these applications. You should also enable a PIN or password. Some individuals think this is too cumbersome and it gets in their way. It actually takes seconds to log in, and with the newer iPhones you can just do it with a thumbprint. That also enables encryption on the device. With an Android, it's another step, but you should enable PIN protection and encryption. Very easy to do, and it reduces your risk significantly. Another interesting one besides the contacts is the photos. You go into photos, just think about it for a moment. How many applications have access to your photos? Were you aware that these applications had access to your photos? And so on and so forth. And what I would suggest to you is that whether you have an iPhone or an Android or you use a certain application, these applications update themselves frequently. And when they do, sometimes they change the way they function with respect to access to your data. You need to be aware of this and at least take a moment and stop and think about what's happened and do I need to review this periodically and just to make sure that nothing's changed. And I didn't allow it because typically when something updates, I don't think many of us in this room are sitting there reading, the 50-page end user licensing agreement. We're just kind of blowing right by that. And I'm going to close with just a few things of what we call the 7 deadly sins. If you take a different approach, you can reduce your risk on a personal level and a professional level. This is a challenge, particularly if you like to download and play games and use other applications. Limit the use of the administrator account. You shouldn't browse the internet as someone who has administrative privileges on their laptop or their desktop or their computer. It's not going to stop 100% of attacks. But when I talk to you about clicking a link and going to a website that has malicious code that's trying to attack you through your web browser and plugins, if you are logged in as someone with administrative privileges and it gets a toehold, it may, and I say may, be able to go deeper into your system and become more entrenched. If you're running in the context of a normal user and you get a pop-up that says, do you want to install something, and you didn't intend on install anything, you may, because it wants administrative credentials, that may prevent a malware infestation. Be careful where you download software from. Yes, it's great to gain access to applications without having to pay for them or trial or try something new or beta. But be advised that there are imposter organizations out there that will give you access to something that looks and feels and plays or functions like the real thing, but it's got malicious code running under the hood that may be just monitoring your activities or logging your keystrokes. Just understand what you're downloading and make sure it's a reputable source. Use antivirus. It's a necessary thing. It's not perfect. It's not going to catch everything, but it may stop something that could become entrenched. What's interesting, one statistic I didn't talk about, in documented breach investigations over the last 10 years, most of the organizations that were compromised because of the lack of an update or antivirus was from something that was over a year old. So it's not even that you have to be running the most current updates with antivirus or security updates, but you need to have something in place. You should be monitoring your accounts, your activity logs on Facebook, and your logs on your financial accounts if you have them. Give you early warning. Avoid risky sites. This is a tough one. We're not going to get into the context and the content of these sites, but the sites that lure individuals to them with gambling, free games, etc., are typically fraught with malicious code. Not always deliberately. Sometimes those sites are taken over by bad actors and malicious codes baked into them, so that when you arrive there with your outdated computer that hasn't been updated and perhaps doesn't have a recent version or a running version of an antivirus program, or you're running Windows XP or something like that, your system is very vulnerable and can be easily attacked and compromised, and it can be done without you even knowing about it. And click before you think. I'll just end with that. Before you click that link, if possible, hover over it and ask yourself, why did this individual send me this email? Why do I need to go to this website? What action are they asking me to take? Could I just load the web browser, the web page on a web browser, and go to the website directly? Could I go to Sony.com directly and log in, or go to Facebook.com directly and log in and take whatever action I'm being asked to take, versus clicking on the link and having it load the website for me? So those are the 7 deadly sins that we recommend that you avoid in order to reduce your risk overall. So do I have any questions? All right.